I remember the exact moment I realized that the world could forget you even on your biggest day. The auditorium smelled faintly of polish and popcorn, and rows of caps and gowns surrounded me like a crowd I was part of but not really seen by. The chatter of parents, friends, and faculty filled the air with excitement, but none of it included me. I adjusted my cap nervously, trying to imagine my parents sitting proudly in the front row, beaming at my accomplishment. I tried to see Lena sitting beside them, as she always seemed to be, radiating a light that everyone gravitated toward, a light I had spent my life pushing forward for her. But there was nothing. Empty seats, blank stares from the crowd, as if the universe itself had conspired to erase this day from my memory. I realized then that some people are remembered not for who they are but for the story others want to tell. My name is Kara Hart, and I was 23 when I finally understood that my family did not value me in the way they claimed to. They had always valued Lena, the picture-perfect sister, the girl with the effortless smile and the charm that seemed born into her. And me, I was the one who held everything together, invisible and essential. I carried the weight of chores, responsibilities, and later, the business. I solved problems before anyone knew they existed. I made life work quietly. And yet the world's attention, the recognition, the applause, it all bypassed me. Growing up, our family had been a careful orchestration. Lena floated through life, each moment framed perfectly, each success documented and celebrated. My life was the scaffolding that made her shine. The hallways of our home smelled of antiseptic from the small healthcare facility my parents ran, and the faint lavender from my mother's obsession with cleanliness and presentation. I followed my father through those halls, small hands pushing a wheelchair that I was barely tall enough to manage, straightening it on my toes, correcting the smallest misalignments. He smiled at me occasionally, but it was always fleeting, a glance more for show than for acknowledgement. My mother's approval was quieter but equally clear. Her nods, subtle and infrequent, confirmed my role without praise. When I brought home straight A's, they were expected, not celebrated. When Lena complained about schoolwork, tutors were hired, trips were planned, and gifts given. The pattern was obvious: responsibility for me, opportunity for her. I understood early that wanting anything for myself was inconvenient. I stopped wanting. I learned to exist in the spaces that went unnoticed, to thrive in usefulness without recognition. By the time I was 16, I had assumed the mantle of caretaker not by choice but by necessity. The business needed me. The residents of our facility needed me. My parents needed me, and Lena needed me to be invisible. Her birthday parties were lavish, mine were functional. She received dance shoes, camps, and vacations. I received the duty of ensuring the house ran smoothly, the staff schedules remained in order, and the residents were cared for. I became someone whose absence would be catastrophic, whose presence went unremarked. I became the backbone of a system no one saw. When I graduated, the empty seats of my parents were confirmation of a lesson I had already internalized. Recognition would never come from those who valued appearances over substance. I realized then that the way to gain power in this family was not through confrontation, nor through loud demands for acknowledgement. The way to gain power was through control, structure, and knowledge, and I had both in abundance. After graduation, I moved carefully through my 20s, building skills and networks, mastering every detail that kept the facility running. I maintained licensing, compliance, vendor contracts, and relationships with physicians and caseworkers. Every operational decision depended on me, yet the credit went elsewhere. My parents continued to elevate Lena's image, investing in her career and appearances while leaving me to maintain the foundation. I did not resent them in a loud, dramatic way. I observed, cataloged, and planned. I understood fully that the family's image could only exist on the structure I upheld. The first opportunity for strategic response came quietly, as all effective strategies do. A family legacy celebration was announced, highlighting Lena's future role in the business. Invitations were precise and deliberate. Mine did not exist. The message was clear: the recognition and spotlight would belong to her as it had always belonged to her. I did not respond with anger. I did not confront. I smiled silently and began assembling the framework of a quiet, undeniable revenge, not the revenge of confrontation, but of structure. I created the Harbor Bridge Foundation, a nonprofit designed to hold the backbone of our operations: licensing, compliance, protocols, and intellectual property. I ensured that the foundation would control all operational decisions, leaving the outward appearance of ownership with my parents and Lena, while transferring all real authority to a structure that respected competence and accountability rather than charm or appearances. I spent months transferring operational control, meticulously documenting every detail and ensuring that every action would withstand scrutiny. By the day of the celebration, everything was in place. Lena floated through the event, charming everyone with her effortless presence. My parents beamed, unaware of the structural truth beneath their feet. I entered quietly, placing 3 items on the central table: the keys, the power of attorney documents, and a red envelope. The room glimmered with soft lighting and polite applause, oblivious to the quiet storm I carried. When Lena opened the envelope and read the contents, her confident posture faltered. The numbers, agreements, and operational authority she assumed would belong to her were already in the hands of the Foundation. The buildings, licenses, and systems she assumed were hers were now held beyond her reach. No drama, no shouting, no spectacle, only clarity. The room fell silent as my parents slowly realized the truth. Appearances without structure were meaningless. I did not gloat. I stepped back, allowing the system I had built to assert itself as it always had. The consequences unfolded quietly over the following days. Staff reports, banking alerts, and compliance checks all routed through the Foundation, leaving my parents and Lena to confront the reality of a system they had always underestimated. I returned to the facility before sunrise, observing the calm of volunteers and residents preparing for the day. Life continued. The piano notes in the recreation room reminded me that work done well does not demand applause. My freedom, long deferred by years of silent labor, was finally complete. I had removed the weight of expectation without confrontation, allowing the structure I built to operate independently. Lena learned that responsibility cannot be inherited. My parents learned that image without substance collapses. And I learned that true power lies not in recognition, but in control, quiet competence, and the ability to step away while leaving everything intact. The morning after the legacy celebration was quiet, almost eerily so. The kind of silence that follows a storm, not with destruction, but with a subtle shift in the air, a new order settling in. I woke early, my thoughts already moving through the schedules, the logs, the system I had built. The foundation I had created was more than paperwork. It was a living structure, ready to assert itself without my interference. For the first time in my life, I was free of their expectations, their invisible chains. I drove across the city streets before sunrise, the pale light reflecting off the quiet pavement. The offices of Harbor Bridge Foundation were empty, still in preparation for the day's operations. Volunteers arranged morning activities, residents murmured softly as they woke, and the facility hummed with the life of work continuing without disruption. I walked through the halls, observing quietly, noting every small detail that needed attention, though there was very little. Everything I had built functioned seamlessly. The years of invisible labor, the meticulous attention to every licensing form, compliance checklist, and operational log, all of it mattered now not to them but to the people who depended on it. Later that morning, I received the first ripple of awareness from my family. An email from my father, hesitant, polite, almost fearful. He asked innocuous questions about schedules, residents, supplies. Questions that betrayed his uncertainty, the realization that his hands no longer controlled the system he assumed was his. Lena called shortly after, her voice light but edged with confusion, asking questions I had no intention of answering. I let the calls go to voicemail. I did not respond. The system spoke louder than my words ever could. By midweek, the subtle shifts began to manifest. Staff members who had depended on my guidance moved efficiently through their tasks, their confidence restored by the structure rather than by me alone. Vendors confirmed contracts with the Foundation, ensuring that operations continued. Regulations were met, and inspections, which had once been a source of stress and chaos, now ran smoothly under the protocols I had cemented into the framework. Everything I had done over the past decade was now untouchable by ignorance or favoritism. I watched my parents begin to unravel slowly, a lesson delivered not by confrontation but by the quiet assertion of truth. My father attempted to insert himself into operational decisions, offering suggestions that were politely ignored by the Foundation's management team. My mother, once so sure of her oversight, found herself questioning every detail, every report, every decision. The confidence they once wielded as authority figures was now powerless, replaced by the structure I had put in place. Lena, meanwhile, faced a reality she had never been prepared for. Accustomed to being the star, to having attention and praise follow her movements, she now encountered the complexity of responsibility. The red envelope I had placed before her contained a letter, carefully written to explain the boundaries, the limits of her inherited position, and the truth of the operational control she could not access. I did not watch for her reaction. I had already seen enough in years of observation to know how it would unfold. Her first week in the facility without me in the operational loop was telling. She moved quickly, almost desperately, trying to manage details she had no experience with. Staff responded politely but did not rely on her the way they relied on me. Mistakes occurred, small at first, then more noticeable. Supply orders were mismanaged, schedules conflicted, and compliance checks highlighted gaps. She began to understand that authority without competence was meaningless, that charm and appearance could not substitute for knowledge and experience. I observed quietly from my office across town, content in my separation from the chaos. The system was self-correcting, not because of me, but because I had built it with integrity and foresight. Every procedural log, every contract, every license and protocol acted as a safeguard. The people in our care were protected, the staff were protected, and the facade my family had relied on crumbled quietly, invisibly but unmistakably. Weeks passed and the subtle lessons continued. Lena's confidence, once effortless, waned. She began to seek guidance, reaching out hesitantly to staff members she had previously ignored or undervalued. My parents, meanwhile, attempted to assert influence, but the Foundation's bylaws and operational procedures limited their capacity to interfere. Their pride met resistance in the form of documented authority, structured oversight, and a system that no longer required them for stability. One evening, I returned to the facility, walking through the halls at dusk. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cooking dinners, the soft hum of lights illuminating the corridors. Residents moved quietly, some laughing softly, others reading or resting. Staff members greeted me with subtle acknowledgement, a nod, a quiet smile, recognizing my presence not as a request for intervention, but as the reassurance of someone who had built the backbone of their work. I paused outside the recreation room, where Lena attempted to guide a small group activity. Her voice was polite, measured, but lacked the confidence she once wielded effortlessly. A volunteer leaned over to her, whispering a correction, and she absorbed it silently, eyes narrowing in concentration. It was humbling to watch, not with malice but with a sense of inevitability. Responsibility had a weight, and now she carried it awkwardly without the scaffold she had always assumed was hers. I walked further, observing, noting, but remaining unobtrusive. This was the essence of my strategy: absence as instruction, structure as education. I had not humiliated anyone, I had merely built a framework strong enough to operate without deference to ego or expectation. The consequences unfolded naturally, silently, ensuring that the lesson was learned without spectacle. The months that followed revealed the full impact of my work. My parents, accustomed to adoration and compliance, realized that their influence had been overestimated. Lena gradually began to adapt, learning to navigate the complexities she had once ignored. The residents continued to thrive, protected by the continuity of the Foundation. Staff members gained confidence in their abilities, no longer dependent on parental oversight or favor. The system worked, and I had stepped aside, finally unburdened by the invisible chains of expectation. I walked through the halls freely, observed the quiet success of my design, and allowed the structure to speak for itself. Freedom was not derived from confrontation, from anger, or even from victory. It was derived from the clarity of boundaries, the power of competence, and the quiet assertion of truth. The story, as it had always been, belonged not to appearances but to substance. I had built something that could not be dismantled by favoritism or neglect. I had crafted a legacy that protected, rather than glorified, the work that mattered. And in that quiet, controlled environment, I finally understood the strength of stepping back, of letting the system operate independently of human pride. Weeks turned into months, and I observed my family's gradual adaptation. Lena, now slightly more competent, no longer relied on charm alone, learning the weight of responsibility with small, hesitant steps. My parents, faced with the reality that their vision had been sustained not by their appearances but by my labor, began to adjust their expectations. The Foundation operated autonomously, maintaining compliance, overseeing operations, and safeguarding the residents with a precision my family had never valued but now could not ignore. The real revelation came during a surprise visit from regulatory officials. My parents assumed their usual role as figures of authority, only to be politely redirected by the documentation, procedures, and legal authority established through the Foundation. Lena observed, quietly, learning the consequences of oversight and inexperience. I remained in the background, watching, noting, but untouched by the necessity to intervene. For the first time, I experienced a sense of liberation that I had never known. The weight of unrecognized labor, the years of invisible work, the constant need to manage and fix what others overlooked, all of it had been transferred into a system that no longer required me to fight for recognition. My presence was no longer a necessity. My influence was embedded in the very structure of the organization. I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection, sitting in my office late at night. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated my notes, the records of years of meticulous effort, and the carefully constructed protocols that ensured continuity and protection. I realized that revenge, in its most powerful form, did not require anger, confrontation, or spectacle. Revenge could be executed with patience, intelligence, and structure. It could be delivered through a system that preserved integrity while stripping away illusions of power from those who had misused it. The peace I felt was not fleeting. It was the result of careful design built over years of observation, labor, and strategy. I had not sought recognition, and I did not need it. I had sought control, clarity, and justice through precision. And in that I found fulfillment, not in the satisfaction of victory over others, but in the quiet assurance that the truth, long ignored, now had a voice that could not be silenced. The weeks turned into months, and the subtle shifts that had begun after the legacy celebration gradually solidified into a new rhythm. The Harbor Bridge Foundation operated like a living organism, autonomous and precise, guided by the structures I had put in place. The staff adapted, volunteers moved seamlessly into routines, and the residents flourished under the steady, predictable care the Foundation ensured. For the first time, the environment reflected competence, not appearances. Lena continued to navigate her inherited role, initially faltering under the weight of responsibilities she had once assumed would be effortless. She made mistakes, oversights in scheduling, minor miscommunications with staff, but each error was a lesson, a reflection of the consequences of assuming authority without understanding. I observed quietly, refusing to intervene unless absolutely necessary, allowing her to experience the realities of leadership firsthand. One afternoon, I watched her struggle with a supply inventory, noting the frustration in her shoulders and the tightening of her jaw. Instead of stepping in immediately, I allowed the situation to play out. A volunteer approached, offering guidance, and Lena listened, hesitated, and then implemented the correction herself. I smiled softly, not for triumph over her, but for the subtle victory of learning through experience. She was slowly becoming competent, understanding that authority demanded more than charm. It demanded foresight, attention, and integrity. My parents, on the other hand, began a different kind of adjustment. The realization that the outward appearance of their legacy could not function without the foundation I controlled was humbling. They attempted to assert influence in meetings, offering suggestions and opinions that had no procedural weight. The staff, polite but firm, adhered to the framework of the foundation, reinforcing that real authority lay not in the perception of ownership but in the structure of operations. It was a delicate balance, observing my family adapt without interfering. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate in private or provoke confrontation. The lesson had to unfold naturally through the consequences of their decisions and the tangible results of competence versus illusion. Slowly, I witnessed the shift. Lena's posture softened from the rigid confidence of someone accustomed to unearned recognition to the careful, deliberate movements of someone learning responsibility. My parents' expressions, once confident and assured, began to show awareness, reflection, and the weight of accountability. One evening, I found myself walking through the halls after hours. The facility was quiet, residents asleep or engaged in low-volume activities. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with baked bread from the kitchen. I paused at the nurse's station, observing the staff completing their final logs. Everything was in order, functioning exactly as it should. My heart swelled, not with pride over recognition, but with satisfaction in seeing the system I had designed operate flawlessly. The lessons I had orchestrated, quietly and without spectacle, were taking root. Approached, hesitating before speaking. "Kara, can I ask you something?" Her voice lacked the usual polish of charm and performance. It was genuine, uncertain, and for the first time stripped of pretense. I nodded. "Of course. I don't understand everything yet. I know I inherited the role, but the foundation, it's overwhelming. How did you manage it all?" Her eyes searched mine, looking for guidance, not confrontation. I smiled gently. "I didn't inherit anything," I said quietly. "I built it. You were given the appearance of authority. I built the reality." Her gaze fell to the floor, then back up, the weight of understanding settling on her. She nodded slowly, as if acknowledging both a truth and a responsibility. "I see now. It's not just about leading. It's about knowing what can't fail." "Exactly," I said. "Responsibility isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with applause or recognition. It comes with understanding, preparation, and the willingness to be invisible when necessary." She swallowed hard, processing the lesson, the words carrying more gravity than any reprimand could have. I'll do better," she whispered. "I want to understand, really understand." "I'll let you," I said softly. "The foundation is designed to protect what matters, not to shield you from consequences. You'll learn through experience, through action, not through praise." In that moment, I realized something essential about power and control. True authority is not demonstrated through dominance or intimidation. It is shown in the ability to create systems that operate independently of ego, to allow learning through experience, and to step aside without fear. Lena's growth would come from facing reality, not from my interference. My parents' realization would stem from understanding that image without substance is powerless. The following weeks brought subtle yet undeniable changes. Lena began participating more effectively in meetings, asking questions, listening intently to staff feedback, and implementing procedural adjustments she had once ignored. Mistakes still happened, but each was a step toward competence, a reflection of learning rather than failure. My parents became quieter in their interventions, observing and occasionally questioning, but gradually acknowledging the authority of the foundation over their assumptions. One particularly quiet afternoon, I sat in my office reviewing the foundation's operational logs. A nurse approached, asking for clarification on a new scheduling protocol. I explained it briefly, then stepped back, allowing the system to self-correct, the staff to implement the changes without my constant oversight. The independence of the operation was complete. I had built a framework that no longer relied on me, only my initial guidance and careful design. Months passed, and the final lessons unfolded naturally. Lena began to lead small projects independently, still hesitant, still learning, but increasingly competent. My parents gradually accepted their limited role, recognizing that authority had shifted from perception to structure. The foundation thrived, residents continued to flourish, and staff operated with confidence. The last piece of closure came quietly, without fanfare. One morning, I visited the main facility before sunrise. Lena was there assisting with morning activities. She looked different, no longer performing for approval, no longer floating above responsibility. She was grounded, deliberate, and quietly confident. I observed her for a moment, noting the subtle changes in her posture and demeanor. Later that day, my parents approached me in the administrative office. My father spoke first, his voice lower, reflective. "Kara, we underestimated you. We assumed appearances were enough. We were wrong." My mother nodded silently, eyes soft but aware. I listened, not seeking apology, not seeking praise, only acknowledging the truth. "It's not about being right or wrong," I said softly. "It's about understanding what matters. You built a name, I built a system. The system sustains the name, not the other way around." They fell silent, absorbing the words, recognizing the truth in a way that required no argument or debate. Lena, standing nearby, listened as well, understanding at last the difference between being seen and being competent, between inheritance and responsibility. In the months that followed, the facility, the foundation, and the family adapted to a new equilibrium. Lena became an effective manager, guided by experience and structured learning. My parents adjusted to advisory roles, their influence limited by the framework I had established, their pride tempered by awareness. And I, Kara Hart, finally experienced the freedom that comes from stepping aside, knowing that the work I had done would continue without reliance on ego or recognition. The final lesson settled quietly like dust in a sunbeam. Revenge had not come through anger or spectacle. It had come through competence, structure, and the patient orchestration of reality. My family had learned that appearances are fragile, and that responsibility demands preparation, understanding, and humility. I continued my work not for recognition, not for reward, but because it mattered. The residents thrived, staff grew in confidence, and the Harbor Bridge Foundation stood as a testament to the power of structure over image, substance over pretense. Lena occasionally sought guidance, my parents occasionally questioned, but the system operated independently, sustaining the values I had instilled. For the first time, I walked through the halls without the weight of expectation pressing on my shoulders. I was no longer carrying anything that was not mine. The freedom was quiet, profound, and absolute. Some stories end with dramatic confrontation, with shouting, or with final reckoning. Mine ended differently. It ended with clarity, with structure, and with the undeniable truth that competence, preparation, and quiet authority will always outlast charm, appearance, and expectation. I sat in my office, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the documents, the protocols, the schedules, and the systems I had built. I allowed myself a deep breath, the weight of unacknowledged labor finally released. Freedom did not come from victory over others. It came from stepping aside, knowing that the foundation I had built would carry the weight of truth without my constant presence. The last evening of observation brought a subtle smile. Lena, no longer floating, moved with careful precision. My parents, no longer assuming control, observed respectfully. The residents thrived, staff operated confidently, and the Harbor Bridge Foundation continued its mission. The work mattered, the people mattered, and I mattered not in applause or recognition, but in quiet authority and enduring impact. I closed the ledger, turned off the light, and walked through the silent halls one last time for that evening. Everything was as it should be. The story, long overdue for resolution, had reached its quiet, inevitable conclusion. I had changed my name, stepped aside, and never returned to the shadows of expectation. I had built a system that spoke louder than words ever could, and for the first time in my life I was truly free.